Thank you very much, and thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Grand Chief Phillip, for joining us today. It's an honor for our committee to hear from you, and thank you for making the trek from the West Coast to share your testimony. Grand Chief Phillip, you, as you alluded to in your presentation, have been on the front lines of the fight of First Nations in defending your territory, your inherent rights. And I feel that today is a bit of a snapshot where we get lost in the weeds around focus, I guess, on the international rather than looking at the very negative impact that this piece of legislation will have on our domestic reality, and particularly impact on Indigenous leaders, members of Indigenous communities, and others as well that are opposing this government's agenda. Do you believe that the goal of C-51 is to instill fear in you and other Indigenous leaders, and even to criminalize the kind of positions that you have been taking on behalf of your people?
Thank you for the question. The short answer is yes. The longer answer is absolutely yes. I don't think there's any doubt in our minds that the real intent of Bill C-51 is to coerce and intimidate Indigenous peoples from defending and protecting their hard-fought international rights that are expressed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, our Section 35 rights in the Constitution of this country, and the hard-fought battles through the Supreme Court of Canada. And this bill will criminalize pretty much everything that has brought us to this point in our history in terms of being able to assert our rights and ensure that our interests are fully protected. And as you've heard, I know in previous presentations that a lot of our history would have been lost if this legislation would have been introduced 40 years ago. I have been involved in these issues for over 40 years. I've served as chief of our community for 14 years. 10 years before that, I was a member of our council. This is my 16th year as president of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I'm the chair of our tribal council. I'm 65, and I have 14 incredibly beautiful grandchildren, whose future I am gravely concerned about with the direction that this country is moving.
Thank you. Earlier we heard a powerful testimony from Pam Palmater about the surveillance that she's been targeted by. We also are aware of other activists, Indigenous activists that have been targeted. We also know of Cindy Blackstock, a social worker who's put forward a case to the Human Rights Tribunal about the underfunding of child welfare in our country. And we know that in terms of First Nations children, and we know that she's been under surveillance by government departments. There's a long list of very recent examples of surveillance, including in 2013 when it was uncovered that the National Energy Board was working with the CSIS and the RCMP monitoring activist groups ahead of the Northern Gateway pipeline hearings. Grand Chief Phillip, should we all be very concerned as Canadians about what this bill would mean in terms of only exacerbating the kind of surveillance that already exists in terms of First Nations people?
Again, I think the short answer is yes. In the work that I do, it's political advocacy work, and Bill C-51 talks about criminalizing, giving public expression to political advocacy work itself. And, you know, obviously our leadership is going to have concerns about what this bill represents in our right of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, and freedom to give public expression to our worldview as it relates to the environment and to our traditional territories. So, you know, we're gravely concerned, and again, we're absolutely convinced this is less about jihad terrorism in this country, and it's more about facilitating and promoting the tripling of the output of the tar sands.
Thank you. And do you think that this piece of legislation is out of touch with Canada, certainly post the Sokoton case, recognizing, well, with the courts recognizing inherent title, and of course what that will mean for First Nations across the country that have been fighting for this this position to be recognized? I've heard from activists who have said, you know, in recognizing First Nations inherent title now at the court level, the kind of activism that will come from that will only be targeted by this bill. Do you think that this government is out of touch with the courts and the direction that First Nations will be taking from here on in?
Yes, absolutely. In British Columbia, the Supreme Court decision in the Sokoton case repudiates forever the notion of terra nullius, of the doctrine of discovery, and indicates very clearly that our Aboriginal title and rights interests are territorial-wide in scope, as opposed to the tired arguments that have been brought forward by Canada and British Columbia in terms of small spots. And our jurisdictional interests are territorial-wide, which puts us on a collision course with major resource development projects, which are the heart and soul of the Harper government. And certainly Bill C-51 talks about threats to the financial and economic stability of the country, which puts that under the shadow of this very abstract and broad notion of what represents terrorism. And again, we're gravely concerned about this.
Your time is up now. We will